Boldwood presents A Riviera Retreat, written by Jennifer Bohnet and read by Julia Franklin. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. A restless Amy Martin wandered alone through Bellevue Villa one Sunday afternoon in late March, lost deep in her memories and regrets. Today, the 5th anniversary of the opening of Bellevue Retreat, was bittersweet in so many ways. She opened the kitchen door and stood on the terrace, looking out over her garden towards the Mediterranean Sea, glinting in the afternoon sunshine in the distance. Situated high up in the hills behind Cannes, Bellevue Villa, one of the smaller Belle Epoque villas along the coast, had enviable views, overlooking the sea and over to the Estoril Mountains. Standing there, Amy sniffed the air and looked around her appreciatively. The perfume from the several mimosa trees in the garden wafted past her, courtesy of the gentle onshore breeze. Amy thought, not for the first time, how life could surprise you with its endless, unexpected twists and turns, some bad, some good. The death of Aunt Tasha, her mother Fleur's older sister, had been so sad, but leaving her Bellevue had been a wonderful surprise, and something of a lifesaver. The two siblings had remained close throughout their lives, but whilst Fleur had stayed near to home when she married, Tasha had followed the love of her life to France and embraced everything that country had to offer. Amy remembered countless family summers spent in the Bellevue Villa, listening to the two sisters reminiscing about their eccentric childhood in the wilds of Somerset. Fleur had been devastated by her sister's early death, telling Amy she'd always known that the villa was to be left to her, because a childless Tasha had a daughter. "It's just that none of us expected it to happen so soon," she'd cried. Walking alone into the hauntingly silent villa, the day the notaire had handed her the keys, knowing it was now hers, Amy had failed to stop the tears flowing. Tears of sorrow, but also of guilt. She'd seen so little of Tasha in the last few years. They'd talked regularly, and Fleur had kept her up to date with Tasha's news, and later her illness. But Amy had rarely visited. Pressure of work had been her prime excuse, although sadly not the full truth. The guilt that had flooded her body after that last hospital visit to see Tasha had been painful. The fact that Bellevue had enabled her to escape her old life and create a new one for herself gave her an overwhelming feeling of gratitude. Knowing it was the direct result of Aunt Tasha dying, though, was the hardest thing to bear and accept. A true, bittersweet inheritance. Tasha had run Bellevue Villa as a successful auberge after Francois, her husband, had died, and Amy knew that the villa would have to continue to earn its keep for her in the future. Rather than having holidaymakers turn up willy-nilly looking for a bed, Amy decided to focus on offering short retreats for writers and painters throughout the year. That way, she'd always know how busy she'd be, with the added bonus of not having to worry about unexpected or unwanted strangers knocking on the door at all times of the day or night. Lots of Tasha's guests had left comments in the visitors' book over the years, saying how special the house felt, how serene the atmosphere around the place was. Several had said the villa was definitely a little French paradise. Amy had vowed to herself that she would do her utmost to keep the lovely ambience that Tasha had masterfully created in and around the villa, while she endeavoured to put her own stamp on the place. 5 years on, Amy knew she could feel proud of what she'd achieved at Bellevue. The auberge was now a popular venue as a retreat for artists and writers, and it was her guests who left compliments in the visitors' book and were returning time and time again. One particular writer had returned 4 times last year, saying she wrote more in a week when staying there than she wrote in a month at home. Amy knew Tasha would be proud and thrilled for her at the way the retreat had found its place in a niche market, and taken off so well. Turning back into the kitchen, Amy picked up the photo of her aunt that stood on the dresser and gently touched it. She owed Tasha so much. Thoughtfully, she replaced the photo. But how to show that gratitude? Tasha had always drummed into her the notion, it's easy to take, but you must always, always give back too. Amy knew that if Tasha had still been alive, she'd have wholeheartedly endorsed the current do a random act of kindness for a stranger memes that seemed to appear every day on social media. Amy smiled, remembering how Tasha had thoroughly embraced social media, joining groups, signing up for causes, and having hundreds of friends on Facebook. Amy also knew her grateful act of paying it back was long overdue. But despite thinking about it for weeks, months, not a single idea had surfaced. Nothing she thought of seemed grateful enough. She glanced at the kitchen clock. A little early, but she'd open the bottle of wine she'd bought especially for today and leave it to breathe for a while. Opening a bottle of wine and silently toasting Tasha while watching the DVD of the film Enchanted April was a ritual that always finished off this particular day for Amy. Tasha had introduced her to the film, and together they'd watched it countless times. As the credits rolled at the end of the film, Amy switched off the DVD, poured the last of the wine into her glass, and opened her laptop, her head spinning not only from the wine she'd drunk, but also with the perfect idea of how to give something back, to finally thank the universe for her good fortune. Like the film she'd just watched, where an advertisement drew 4 women together, all strangers to each other, for a holiday in an Italian castle in the 1920s. Her random act of kindness would begin with an advertisement too. Not in a newspaper, but on 21st century social media. Are you a woman who longs to spend time in retreat, or simply in need of a holiday? Answer the following question. Who wrote the book, Enchanted April? And, in less than 100 words, say which character you identify with most and why you need to win a holiday, June the 6th to the 16th, at a retreat in the countryside, behind the French Riviera. Travel expenses not included, but low-cost flights are available to Nice. Transport to and from the airport will be arranged. Please note, the date of the holiday on offer is not changeable or transferable. Competition closes midnight, the 31st of this month. 3 lucky winners will be notified by email within 1 week of the competition closing. A week later, on the 1st of the following month, Amy opened the file she'd saved all the entries in and began sorting through the replies. All 65 of them. Quite a respectable number, considering the details had been on Facebook for such a short time. Some entries she discarded immediately. Either the answer to the question was incorrect, or the writer was clearly blagging in the hope of winning a holiday. One entry even brazenly stated, "No idea of the answers, but I need a holiday, so would be very grateful to win." Amy printed out the rest of the entries, numbering the pages individually from 1 to 57 as the printer threw them out into the tray. Then she tore up some paper into small pieces before numbering those too, from 1 to 57, and placing them all in a deep cake tin with a lid and shaking it violently for several seconds. Carefully, she took the lid off, closed her eyes tightly, and plucked out 3 random pieces of paper. When she opened her eyes and looked, she'd picked out numbers 13, 27, and 41. Flicking through the printouts, she identified the corresponding numbers. Number 13 was a Vicky Lewis from London. Number 27 was a Chelsea Newman from Bristol. Number 41 was a Matilda Richardson, also from Bristol. Opening her laptop, Amy emailed the 3 women to tell them the good news. Paying back her good fortune had officially started. Chapter 1. Vicky Pinehill, née Lewis, had the house to herself for the evening, something that was happening several times a week, now the children were older and out and about, living their own lives. It had been strange at first to find herself with the odd hour not spoken for, the time hers to do with as she wished. With both Tom and Susie out working now, time to call her own had increased. Time that Anthony had already suggested she used to get more involved with the constituency, take on more of the paperwork for him. In effect, become even more of a full-time politician's wife. Of course, Vicky supported Anthony in every way she could, but she didn't relish the thought of taking on more responsibility in his political life. Politics was his life, not hers. Although it had to be said that Anthony himself didn't seem that happy these days either. His initial euphoria the day he'd won his seat and promised to do his best for everyone had gradually disappeared. Killed, Vicky suspected, by the mountain of bureaucracy he was faced with on a day-to-day basis. If she did take on more of the office side of things, it would free him up to concentrate fully on the things that were important to him, and leave her life still in the rut she was beginning to feel desperate to escape from. Vicky sighed. After all the years of being a mum and a wife, surely it was her turn now. She wanted, she realised, to be Vicky Lewis again, to find the girl she'd once been, to pick up the pieces of the life she'd abandoned when she became pregnant and married Anthony. She'd enjoyed her short foray into the world of books and publishing after university, but she didn't particularly want to go back into that world, at least not from the same angle. She'd always longed to write, and she'd had this idea for a novel for ages now. Had even started to scribble sentences and scenes down in a notebook she kept hidden in her bag. But there always seemed to be something more important to attend to when she had time to spare. She searched the wooden cabinet underneath the television where they kept their collection of DVDs. A Facebook advertisement she'd seen a few days ago for a competition to win a retreat-type holiday in the south of France had reminded her of one of her all-time favourite films, Enchanted April. While Anthony was in Westminster this evening for a crucial vote, and both the children were out, she was going to pour herself a glass of wine and lose herself in a gentle story set in a world she suspected sadly no longer existed. Bliss. 2 hours later, as the closing credits faded away, Vicky sighed. Italy in the 1920s must have been wonderful. Replacing the DVD back in its case, she picked up her laptop and logged on to Facebook. Looking at the competition questions again, she briefly wondered whether it was genuine, or just a con to bombard people with dodgy internet holiday sites. The question, who wrote the book, was easy. Elizabeth von Arnim, rumoured to have been the lover of H.G. Wells at one time. Which character did she identify with the most? Lady Caroline Dester was too young. Lottie Wilkins? A bit perhaps, but she didn't have children. Mrs. Fisher was too old. So, it would have to be Rose, who spent a lot of her time with children and did good works. Vicky smiled to herself. Apart from 2 mornings a week in the local charity shop, she didn't do good works, per se. She left that to Anthony. But she'd done her child-rearing duties, Anyway, she had a soft spot for Miranda Richardson, the actress who played Rose, ever since the days of Queenie in Blackadder. But as for the reason why she should win a holiday, that was difficult. The question made her feel selfish and self-indulgent. There were far more deserving people out there. People who couldn't afford to go away. People who needed to get away. She simply wanted some time on her own to gather her thoughts and make a plan of what she wanted to do. Not necessarily for the rest of her life, but for the next few years at least. A holiday in a retreat would give her the ideal opportunity to think things through, have time to concentrate on her writing, and to decide whether or not she could actually write a novel. Shame it wasn't in Italy like the film, but the south of France was a good substitute. And those particular days at the beginning of summer were perfect. Tom and Susie would be busy at work, and Parliament would still be sitting. So, Anthony wouldn't have much free time to miss her. It wouldn't hurt the three of them to look after themselves for once. Maybe she'd ask Anthony's mother to come and stay. The fact that the competition questions were based around a favourite film must surely mean she'd be on the same wavelength as other people, should she win. Which was unlikely, she'd never won anything in her life. Oh, wait. Once, on holiday, she'd hooked a plastic duck at a fairground to win a goldfish in a plastic bag. But her mother had vetoed accepting it, as it would only die before they could get it home and into a proper bowl. She remembered howling all the way back to their holiday chalet. Oh, blow it! She'd send an entry off in her maiden name, Vicky Lewis. The chances of her actually winning were, what? Probably as high as the odds of her winning the lottery. But, and it wasn't a big but, Vicky realised, when she didn't win, she'd find a cheap B&B somewhere on the coast and do an Agatha Christie for those 10 days at the beginning of June. Chapter 2. Hiding away from the world every evening in her small flat, after the mammoth fallout that had occurred in her life, Chelsea Newman spent a lot of hours on her laptop. She flipped through endless Facebook pages, read all the fake news, and entered mindless giveaways and competitions. None of which helped her to forget how stupid and gullible she'd been, behaving like a teenager rather than a 23-year-old woman with her own business. At least her father hadn't heard about the disaster that was her personal life yet, and she prayed every night that he never would. She could imagine his sorrow mixed with disdain at her actions. If there were to be repercussions for the business, especially after the way he'd supported Elsie and her. She and Elsie, best friends since catering college, had been keen to set up their own bijou cordon bleu catering business. When the bank had taken one look at their business plan and refused them the necessary loan, her father had made them an offer they couldn't refuse, despite Chelsea wanting to do things independently. A successful and shrewd businessman, Simon Newman offered to bankroll them and give them 6 months interest-free credit to help them get the business underway. Chelsea accepted only after she'd extracted a promise from him that he wouldn't interfere with the way she and Elsie ran it. So far, he'd stuck to his word. They'd done very little advertising, relying on their cooking to be their best advertisement for spreading the word. Just 2 years later, and they'd found their niche in the growing demand for weekday lunchtime functions and the occasional evening cocktail party. They employed one full-timer, Tina, who helped in the kitchen, and 2 casual part-timers to help serve the food at functions. They were paying back the loan, and Chelsea was planning to move out of her rented flat at the end of the summer and buy one of the apartments in the new development on the edge of town. To celebrate the anniversary of the business, Simon had taken her out for an expensive evening, theatre followed by dinner, telling her how proud he was of her success. Neither of them mentioned her mother. Elsie had, of course, been invited, but couldn't come the only evening Simon was available. Meeting Kit 3 months ago had been the icing on the cake for her. Tall, blonde, and too handsome for his own good, she kept pinching herself at her good luck in meeting him. Chelsea couldn't believe that he liked her as much as she adored him. Of course, with him working and travelling a lot as a publishing representative, they didn't see each other as often as Chelsea would like. Kit did text or phone every evening, though, and that kept her going from one date to the next. Her own life was in a happy place, but she was becoming increasingly worried about Elsie. On the surface she was still the same, but Chelsea had sensed that something was troubling her. Something that Elsie had refused to talk about when Chelsea had tackled her. She'd simply shrugged and insisted there wasn't anything wrong. Chelsea knew that she was going to have to insist soon that they sat down together and get Elsie to explain what was troubling her. She hoped and prayed it wasn't a case of Elsie wanting out. The success of the business was down to her as much as to Chelsea, and she doubted that she could manage it on her own. Absently scrolling on down through Facebook, Chelsea saw another competition ad, this time for a free holiday in the south of France. She clicked on the details. She'd never heard of either the book or the film called Enchanted April. But 5 minutes on the internet, and Google had given her the author's name, a list of characters, and a summary of the plot, which sounded decidedly old-fashioned in her opinion. The only character she could possibly identify with would be Lady Caroline Dester, simply because she appeared to be the youngest. As for why she needed the holiday, that bit was easy. She simply wrote, "I've messed up my life spectacularly and need to get away, regroup, and lick my wounds." A quick read-through, and she pressed the enter button. Highly unlikely she'd win, but dreaming about a holiday in the south of France was better than wallowing in the despair she was currently feeling. If anyone had asked her how life was a week ago, Chelsea would have replied with an enthusiastic, "It's super! Great!" And it had been. Then, without warning, it had fallen apart. It had been a Friday lunchtime, and she and Elsie had taken a late booking to do a champagne buffet lunch for 20 in one of the prestigious office blocks down on the waterside near the town centre. Apparently, it was to be a surprise for the sales team after the best month ever. The plummy-voiced woman placing the booking had explained, "I do hope you're free. You've been highly recommended, and if you're as good as rumours suggest, you could become our regular caterers. We entertain a lot." "It's very short notice, and we do have another buffet luncheon already booked in for this Friday," Chelsea had said, hating the thought of turning a prospective regular customer away. "But we can certainly supply an array of finger food and champagne. Our basic price for 20 people is—" "Cost is not important, but quality is." The woman had cut her off. "I want the best. Be at the office with everything set up, ready to serve, by 12:30. Chelsea went to say a polite goodbye, and had realised the line was dead. What was the woman on? Barely 48 hours' notice, and rude with it. Maybe she was just having a bad day. If she was as rude face-to-face on Friday, then catering for her would definitely be a one-off. They didn't need clients like her. Friday morning, Chelsea and Elsie had arrived early at the offices, and a friendly receptionist had shown them into the function room. Elsie, Chelsea was pleased to see, seemed to be like her old self, happily telling Chelsea about a party she'd been to the evening before, where she'd met this man, Angus, whom she really liked and was seeing at the weekend. By 12:25, the food was laid out, and bottles of the already chilled champagne were in their ice buckets. Thankfully, there had been no sign of the rude woman so far. At 12:30, the receptionist had poked her head around the door. "Everyone's on their way." Minutes later, the room was crowded with people, and Chelsea and Elsie were busy pouring drinks and handing food around. Chelsea handed a glass of champagne to a woman who thanked her before turning to the man at her side. "Where's the boss and golden boy, then? Isn't it his sales figures we're supposed to be celebrating?" The man had shrugged. "Office door's locked. Imagine they'll be congratulating each other in the usual way. Don't know why he puts up with it." The woman had almost choked on her drink. "Come off it. It's one of the reasons they're married. She's a right nymphomaniac, and he's more than happy to oblige, especially after being away all week." Picking up a bite-sized onion and fish tartlet, the woman had moved away. "Nymphomaniac? They can't be talking about the rude woman, can they?" Chelsea had whispered to Elsie as she carefully uncorked another bottle of champagne. Seconds later, and the hub of chatter that filled the room went down a decibel as a blonde woman walked in purposefully. "Hi, everyone. Chris will be along in a moment. He has no idea that he's the inspiration behind this week's celebration," she said, glancing across to Chelsea and Elsie and the table where the food was laid out. She had made her way over to them. "It all looks delicious," she said. "I'm Marcia, and I'll have a glass of champagne, please. Which of you ladies is Chelsea?" "That would be me," Chelsea had said, smiling and handing her a glass. "Enjoy." "I intend to. Ah, Chris, you're here. I thought you deserved a surprise this week," Marcia had said, turning to face her husband as he appeared at her side. "I know you've already helped yourself to the caterer, but feel free to help yourself to some champagne and food." "Oh, not hungry? I wonder why." She had turned to look at a pale Chelsea, who was clutching the table for support and staring at the man she knew as Kit. "I rarely mix business with pleasure, but I made an exception on this occasion," Marcia had added. "Two things. One, stay away from my husband. And two, don't bother to send me an invoice for today's lunch, as I have no intention of paying you. You can sue me, if you want, but I doubt that you will." And with that, Marcia had jerked her head in Kit's direction and swept out. Chelsea had watched, frozen into silence, as Kit, without a backward glance, had hurried after his wife before she'd collapsed as the enormity of what had just happened hit her. Chapter 3. Slipping on a patch of ice on the pavement outside the library the last week in January, and breaking her ankle, meant that a disgruntled Matilda Richardson was confined to her flat with time on her hands. Even the view across the downs, with its glimpse of the magnificent Clifton Suspension Bridge that had enticed her and William to buy the flat in the first place, failed to lift her spirits. But it was the dependence on others that irked her the most. She knew she wasn't good at hiding her irritation at her neighbour, Sheila's good-natured bossiness, and the taking over of her day-to-day life for weeks on end. She was grateful to Sheila, truly she was. Life with a broken ankle would have been a lot harder without her. But Matilda's independent streak always made it difficult for her to ask for help from anyone. Josh, her son, being the exception, but as he was away working with the environmental group, Sea Shepherd, for another month or two, she simply had to submit to Sheila's kindness, even if she did feel guilty about accepting everything she did for her. It wasn't as if she and Sheila had been close friends before the accident. Friendly acquaintances, yes. Since William's death, they'd enjoyed the occasional coffee together in the cafe in the mall, when they happened to meet up. But friends who talked about more than the weather or the state of the country under this useless government, no, they weren't friends like that. Matilda had had few close female friends since school. The idea of going on a girls' night out had never appealed, and she'd definitely preferred to go without the proverbial borrowed cup of sugar if she ran out, rather than knock on a neighbour's door. Consequently, she'd had no best friend to call on in her hour of need. But Sheila had stepped up to the mark. Matilda resolved to find her a nice gift once she was back on her feet, and life took on its normal routine again. Normal routine? Matilda sighed. The trouble was, her normal routine, even pre-broken ankle, had become somewhat dull and uninspiring. Throughout their married life, she and William had never felt the need for a large social circle, mainly preferring their own company, and that of Josh when he was home. But being a widow was proving to be a lonely state, and it was only now, unexpectedly confined to the flat with time on her hands, and nothing to do except read and watch DVDs, that Matilda began to wonder about the rest of her life. At 28, Josh, her only son, was showing no signs of settling down and having a family. So, grandmother duties were unlikely to feature in her near future. A knock on the unlocked door interrupted her thoughts, and Sheila bustled in for the second time that day.
Coffee time. I brought us each a slice of the coffee and walnut cake I made last night. I hope you like it.
And she set the tray down on the table in front of Matilda. Thank you, Matilda said, smothering a groan and accepting a plate. I'm going to be the size of a house if you keep feeding me cake every day.
Nonsense, there's nothing of you, especially compared to me,
Sheila sighed, looking down at her own ample body. When this is healed, Matilda said, pointing to the black box around her ankle that had replaced the plaster cast, maybe you'd like to come walking with me. Not being able to go on her usual daily march across the downs was, she knew, adding to her current frustration.
I'd enjoy that,
Sheila said hesitantly.
You know that DVD you lent me last week, Enchanted April?
Matilda nodded. You said you'd really enjoyed it.
Oh, I did. Love gentle period dramas like that. There was a competition on Facebook yesterday. Did you see it?
No.
The questions were all to do with that story.
Sheila paused.
So, I've entered.
Good for you. What's the prize?
A 10-day holiday in June to a retreat in the south of France.
Sounds wonderful. I hope you win. You deserve a holiday after all you've done for me, Matilda said.
Oh, it's not for me. I couldn't possibly go anywhere like that. No, I've entered in your name.
Matilda looked at Sheila, stunned.
What? It will be a nice place for you to finish convalescing. The chances of you winning are quite low, I should imagine, but I thought I'd better tell you just in case.
What were the questions?
Author name, which character you identify with, and why you need a holiday. For that last one, I said you lived alone, had broken your ankle, and really needed time to recuperate, and that Enchanted April was your favourite film.
Matilda didn't have to ask which character Sheila had linked her to. It would be the haughty and difficult Mrs. Fisher, without a doubt. She sighed. Like you say, winning is extremely unlikely, but thank you for thinking of me. Is there any coffee left in the jug? Extremely unlikely it may have been. But the day Matilda was finally discharged by her doctor and told to take it easy for a couple more weeks, Sheila ran into the flat, waving a piece of paper.
You've won! You've won! You're going on retreat to the south of France.
Day 1 of the holiday, June the 6th. Chapter 4. Amy parked the car in the multi-storey and, making her way out, crossed the main road and went down the flight of metal steps that took her into the street that led into Cannes via the covered market. The last couple of months had been busy enough with some regular guests, but today was the day the competition winners were arriving. Amy smiled as she entered the crowded market. She loved this place, loved shopping here, her wicker basket over her arm slowly filling with local produce. Loved all the variety of food on offer, loved everything about it. After 5 years, the stallholders all knew her. She always tried to buy from the smaller stalls, the ones with the old ladies behind trestle tables, with the produce of their potagers, rather than the big commercial stalls. Pierre, the gardener she'd inherited with Bellevue Villa, grew a lot of their vegetables, potatoes, onions, courgettes, peppers, and all the summery salad stuff. But at this time of year, she always bought the asparagus, roquette, courgette flowers, rosé garlic, and the freshest, juiciest raspberries imaginable from Madame in the centre of the market. Then there was a cheese stall with its brie and the creamiest buffalo mozzarella she'd ever tasted. Wandering around, Amy brought her thoughts back to the things she needed and stopped in front of the boulangerie stand, buying 3 baguettes, a sourdough round loaf, and some olive bread. Everything on her list ticked off, she made her way to the coffee shop in the street near the top end of the market. Time for an espresso and a favourite palmier biscuit before heading home. Sitting there people-watching, Amy's thoughts drifted to the 3 strangers who were the winners of the competition she'd impulsively advertised. Was it a little crazy, this idea of hers, inspired by the characters in her favourite film? Were the 3 prize winners she'd picked out genuinely in need of a peaceful break, like she hoped? Would they be women who would understand the ethos behind her wanting to do someone a random kindness? Maybe she should have asked her regular retreat guests to nominate someone deserving of a holiday. And what if the 3 winners she'd picked didn't get on? Then the next 10 days would seem like 10 weeks. The little she was able to glean from the competition entries and the follow-up emails told her that the 3 of them were unlikely to have much in common. Vicky and Chelsea's email replies to her own "You've won a holiday" email had both been phrased in excited language and thanked her effusively. Amy thought Matilda's reply had been slightly reserved, but the phrase "looking forward to it immensely" reassured her that she was pleased to accept the prize. Amy sipped her coffee and prayed this holiday would work out well for all of them, herself included. She'd really wanted to do something to say thank you and pay back her good fortune, and she knew Tasha would approve of what she was doing. Whatever. It was too late to stop it now. This afternoon, she was driving to the airport to collect them all. Vicky Lewis was arriving on the London flight at 3:30. Matilda Richardson and Chelsea Newman were flying from Bristol and would land at 4:15. The plan was to greet Vicky and take her for a coffee while they waited for the other 2, before all travelling back to the villa together. Fingers crossed there were no strikes or flight delays today which could complicate the best-laid plans. A couple of hours later, Amy was waiting in the arrivals hall at Nice Airport, holding up her first placard with "Vicky Lewis" written on it. Watching anxiously as people started to come through the luggage area, she sent up a silent prayer that everyone would get on and that Bellevue Villa would work its magic. Amy liked Vicky the moment she walked through into arrivals. They were about the same age, and she sensed a kindred spirit. "Hi, Vicky. I'm Amy," she said, holding out her hand. "Hello, Amy, the giver of free holidays. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here," Vicky said, smiling as they shook hands. "I'm happy you're here too," Amy replied, returning the smile. "Good flight? I thought we'd have a coffee together while we wait for the others. Are you okay with your wheelie suitcase, or would you rather take it to the car?" "Have we got long to wait?" "No, about half an hour," Amy answered. "Coffee then, please. My case is quite manoeuvrable." Choosing seats in the coffee shop where they had a good view of the ETA board in the hall, Amy told Vicky a little about the retreat and the surrounding area before glancing at the laptop bag strapped to Vicky's case. "Your email said you wanted time for yourself to think about the future and to try and write," she said. "I hope this time at Bellevue will help you with both of those." Vicky sighed. "I hope so too. I couldn't believe I'd won when you emailed me the news. I feel guilty about accepting, if I'm honest. But time out just for me couldn't have come at a better moment. Now the children are grown, I'd like to do something for me, rather than get sucked into other things, with all the free time I now supposedly have." She glanced at Amy. "My husband, Anthony, is keen for me to take on more in his constituency than I really want to. He doesn't understand why I'm so reluctant. Oh, blast!" Vicky looked at Amy. "Please, don't tell the others my husband's a politician. People tend to treat me differently when they hear whom I'm married to. At least I can still manage to have the occasional private moment, using my maiden name." "Your secret's safe with me," Amy said, hoping Vicky didn't suspect she'd immediately started wondering who her husband was, or whether he was in the cabinet. "I know how husbands have a habit of assuming and taking decisions they've no right to take, given half the chance." Before Vicky could say anything, Amy continued quickly. "Not that I have a husband anymore. I left him around the time my Aunt Tasha left me Bellevue." "Thank you," Vicky said, clearly relieved, but not liking to pursue the matter of Amy's ex-husband. "Did you say the others are coming on the Bristol flight? It's just landing, according to the board." "Better get back to meeting and greeting, then," Amy said, standing up and reaching for her name placards. "I'll come with you," Vicky said, jumping up and following Amy. Matilda and Chelsea came through into the arrivals hall together. Matilda leaning on a stick, and Chelsea with both her backpack and Matilda's case loaded on a trolley. Amy, seeing Matilda's stick, sighed, hoping that moving around the house and grounds wouldn't be a problem for her. There were a few flights of steps dotted around the place. At least she'd allocated Matilda the Fitzgerald room on the ground floor, which had French doors opening directly onto the terrace at the side of the house. Amy introduced Vicky and herself to Matilda and Chelsea before they left the airport concourse to make their way to the car. Chelsea sniffed. "What's that lovely smell?" "It's the eucalyptus trees," Amy said, pointing to the tall trees that lined the car parks and the circumference of the airports, offering shade. "I forget the particular variety, but the heat of the sun releases the oil aroma from the leaves." "The sky is so blue," Vicky said. "So different to the London I left this morning. And is so warm." Once everything was stowed in the car, and with Vicky and Chelsea insisting Matilda took the front passenger seat so she could stretch her leg out, Amy began the drive back to Bellevue. While she concentrated on the road, she hoped the other three would chat amongst themselves and slowly get to know each other. But they were all too busy looking at the Mediterranean on one side and the villas and other sundry buildings on the other. Half an hour later, Amy turned into the driveway, and they all got their first glimpse of Bellevue Villa, their home for the next 10 days. Chelsea uttered a spontaneous, "Wow!" "What a beautiful place," Vicky said, gazing at the Provençal mass with its mellow stonework, the terracotta roofs on different levels, and the rampant purple bougainvillea over the front and side of the house. "You have a delightful home," Matilda added. "I think we're about to spend time in paradise." "Oh, who's this?" Chelsea asked, bending down to stroke an energetic bundle of white fur. "This is Lola. I inherited her along with the villa," Amy answered. "She's supposed to be a pure Bolognese, but I suspect there's a rogue gene in there somewhere." "Whatever she is, she's gorgeous," Chelsea said. "Love her curls." "Come on, I'll show you to your rooms," Amy said. All the rooms are named after famous people who had a connection with the south of France. Matisse, Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Piaf, etc. "And you, Lola, can stay outside," Amy added sternly. "She's not allowed in the bedrooms, but she has been known to sneak in occasionally." 10 minutes later, and Amy had shown them all to their different rooms, pointed out the trays with tea and coffee, and, after telling them aperitifs on the main terrace at the front of the house would be at 7:15, with dinner at 7:45, she left them to unpack. Matilda sank onto the Lloyd-loomed chair, thoughtfully placed to take in the view, and sighed with pleasure. Such a lovely room, and the view through the French doors leading onto the terrace was a meeting of intense blue sky over the green of the garden, and the azure blue of the Mediterranean nudging the coastline on the horizon. When Sheila had told her she'd won the holiday, she'd tried to persuade her to take it for herself.
I can't. It's in your name, and the rules clearly state it isn't transferable.
In the end, Matilda had stopped arguing and replied to Amy's email, accepting the prize. Now she was here. She was looking forward to relaxing, enjoying the break, and hopefully making new friends. Chelsea had been so helpful and kind when they met in the departure lounge at Bristol Airport, and realised they were both competition winners on the way to Bellevue Villa. Vicky seemed a friendly woman, and as for Amy herself, well, as the giver of the holiday, she was clearly a generous and thoughtful woman, and so graceful in her movements. Matilda picked up a book from the low table conveniently placed at the side of the chair. F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tales of the Jazz Age, one of his books she hadn't read. She knew Fitzgerald had spent a lot of time on the Riviera during the 20s and 30s, when the Jazz Age was at its height. Maybe there would be some tales set down here. Hopefully, her ankle would be strong enough before the end of the holiday for her to walk unaided around Antibes in Fitzgerald's footsteps. She'd dutifully spent the last few months doing the exercises the physiotherapist had given her and trying to use her stick less and less, which had proved difficult. Her ankle was definitely better, but she was terrified of falling again, and the stick had become like a third leg, one that gave her confidence and a sense of security. Right now, she fancied a reviving cup of tea. One of the Earl Grey tea bags she'd spotted on the tray would do nicely. Waiting for the kettle to boil, she found her iPad and sent Josh a quick email.
I've arrived safely. Villa is wonderful. Hope all is well with you. Love, Mum. Kiss.
Taking her tea, she opened the French doors and stepped out onto the terrace. A small wrought-iron table and 2 chairs had been placed to one side of the doors. Perfect. The garden in front of her was a beautiful mixture of lawn and flower beds, containing a variety of wonderful white and scarlet roses. A hedge of pink oleander stretched down the right-hand side, where she could see a man carefully hoeing away at the weeds. A garden was the main thing she missed when they'd sold the old family home that William had inherited from his parents and downsized into the flat. With Josh leaving home and William wanting to shorten his daily commute to work, it had made sense. But Matilda had wept a secret tear or two over the decision. She'd loved pottering around the garden of an evening, William at her side as they caught up with each other's day. William had promised that once he'd retired they'd move to France, find a cottage with a garden, and the two of them would grow old together, living the country life they'd always dreamed of living. A heart attack had decreed otherwise, killing William one Sunday morning as they'd strolled through Clifton Village towards their favourite restaurant for lunch. And just like that, everything had changed. For the past 16 months, Matilda had lived alone in the flat, coming to terms with her loss and trying to find consolation in the numerous pots she jammed together on her small balcony, and failing miserably. Every time she watered and tended to the pots, in her heart she was wishing herself somewhere else, in a cottage with a proper garden. When she'd mentioned her feelings to Josh on one of his visits, he'd advised her to take her time deciding what to do, and not to do anything too drastic, too quickly. Winning the holiday here, courtesy of Sheila and Amy's kindness, had started her dreaming again of moving to France. Thoughts she'd squashed as being an impossible dream for her to do alone. But something was beginning to niggle away in her brain, telling her she wasn't that old, that she still had years of life left in front of her. William had left her financially more than comfortable, and she knew that, more than anything, he would want her to be happy. Matilda finished her tea. Maybe being in France for 10 days would help her decide what to do with her future. Tomorrow morning, she'd enjoy taking a wander and exploring the gardens. She started to really think about the rest of her life. Right now, though, she was going to sit here and simply admire the view before unpacking and getting ready for aperitifs and dinner on the terrace. For the first time in months, she was feeling hungry. Must be the sea air, she decided. In the Edith Piaf room, next door, Vicky had taken one look at the ensuite marble bathroom, the deep, claw-footed bath with its gold taps, an array of fragrant toiletries on a shelf, and started to run a bath. Her unpacking could wait. At Anthony's insistence, it was showers all the way at home, and as much as she loved being pounded by the hot water of a power jet shower, she did sometimes long to immerse herself in litres of perfumed water for a rejuvenating soak. Vicky glanced at the book on the bedside table. The Life of Edith Piaf. She smiled. When Amy had told them the rooms at Bellevue were named after people who had a connection with the south of France, she'd hoped for the Fitzgerald room. Instead, Amy had given her this particular room. How could Amy have known? Vicky's mother was a great Piaf fan. She'd even travelled to Paris back in the 60s to go to the funeral with thousands of adoring fans. When Vicky had asked, what was so special about her? Her mum had shaken her head. I'm not sure. She didn't have an easy life, but her voice and song spoke to millions. Still do. 10 minutes later, happily soaking in the scented water with her eyes closed, her mother's favourite Piaf song, Non, je ne regrette rien, floated unbidden into Vicky's conscience. I have no regrets, the song went. How many people could honestly say that? The life Vicky was currently living certainly wasn't the one she'd envisaged as a teenager. Back then, she'd planned to go to university, obtain a good degree, and then travel the world, possibly as a travel writer. Earn enough money to buy her own home and be independent. Marry in her early 30s and settle down to family life with 2 children. In her mind, it had all been mapped out. Only family life with 2 children had come to fruition. Meeting Anthony when she was 18, falling pregnant with Tom within weeks of starting her first job, had derailed the rest of her life plans. She certainly didn't regret having the children, or marrying Anthony. She'd loved him from the beginning, and she still did. Only she hadn't reckoned on him changing course from IT consultancy and becoming a politician. Of course, they discussed it, but with hindsight, Vicky realised neither of them had really anticipated the changes it would bring into their lives. The biggest for Vicky being the loss of privacy. As far as other regrets went, although she didn't regret any of the past 20-odd years, she knew that if she wasn't careful, didn't do something with her own life from here on in, well, that she would regret. But standing up to Anthony was hard. Not because he was unkind or difficult, but simply because she felt guilty for wanting to do other things. Winning this holiday had caused the first major row they'd had for years. She'd been on Facebook looking at the holiday details and starting to make a list of all the things she'd need. List-making was in her DNA, and for a long time, Vicky had tried to fight the habit. But in the end, realising how satisfying it was ticking things off as they were accomplished, she gave in. As she'd made a note to check her passport, find a suitable case in the attic, and look out some summer clothes, Anthony had walked in and looked at the computer screen.
Facebook? Surely you've got better things to do than waste time with that. I could certainly do with some more help in the office.
Vicky had bitten her tongue to stop herself protesting that she'd only been on there 5 minutes, saying instead,
"Guess what? I've won a holiday to the south of France." "When for? I can't see me getting away until the recess," Anthony had replied, "and even then, anything longer than a week will be difficult."
Vicky had taken a deep breath. It's only for one person.
"You mean you're going on your own?"